The world believes power changes slowly through negotiation, through time. That belief is now obsolete. Power no longer asks, it moves, it seizes. When the United States says we will take it, this is not metaphor, it is execution. In a single day, $5.2 billion was redirected. No debate, no court, no delay, just custody. This story is not about Venezuela. It is about refineries designed half a century ago, oil that fits like a missing gear, asphalt that quietly lowers inflation. It is about a new doctrine. If you control the flow, you don't need permission. If this sharpens how you see power, stay with me, because what appears to be an oil decision is actually the first move in a much larger system being activated. In the next part, we need to define the real problem this strategy is solving. What problem is this really solving? Not diplomacy, not ideology, not even oil. The real problem is fragility. An economy built on assumptions that no longer hold, refineries calibrated decades ago now starved of the exact input they require, infrastructure projects stalled by material costs that feed inflation, energy markets exposed to shocks half a world away, and a system where delays are more dangerous than mistakes. This is what happens when industrial reality collides with political time. You cannot vote your way out of refinery physics. You cannot negotiate with supply chain math. So the question shifts, not should this be done, but what happens if it isn't? In moments like this, states stop optimizing for approval and start optimizing for continuity. Speed replaces consensus, control replaces process, and power reveals its true priority, keeping the system running at all costs. In the next part, we need to step back and understand how this vulnerability was created in the first place. The vulnerability did not appear overnight. It was engineered quietly over decades. 50 years ago, the United States built the largest refining system on earth, not for light oil, for heavy crude that few countries could supply at scale. Venezuela was one of them. Its oil was dense, difficult, perfect. Refineries in Texas, Louisiana, and the Gulf Coast were tuned precisely for it, like engines built for one specific fuel. Then politics intervened. Sanctions, nationalizations, isolation, production collapsed from 3.5 million barrels a day to less than 1. But the refineries never changed. They couldn't. Rebuilding them would take decades and trillions. So the system adapted in the only way it could, by stretching, by substituting, by absorbing inefficiency, until it couldn't anymore. What we're seeing now is not aggression, it is reversion, a system snapping back to the logic it was built on. In the next part, that snap becomes visible through the first real crisis point. The snap does not arrive politely, it arrives as a shock. One decision, one sentence, one moment where restraint disappears. We will take it, not negotiate, not license, not request, take. Within hours, oil that once moved under foreign sovereignty was rerouted under direct custody. $5.2 billion shifted on day one alone. Markets froze. Allies hesitated. Opponents recalculated. Because this was not just an oil move, it was a signal, a declaration that speed now outweighs legitimacy. That delay is a bigger threat than backlash. This is how systems behave when buffers are gone, when redundancy has been exhausted. In moments like this, governments stop pretending that rules are neutral. They reveal what the rules were always for, to be ignored when survival math turns negative. If this feels uncomfortable, it should. Because shocks like this are not anomalies, they are previews. In the next part, we need to decode the hidden mechanism that makes this kind of seizure not reckless but inevitable. What looks like chaos is actually design. Behind the shock is a mechanism cold, deliberate, and highly rational. Control does not begin with ownership. It begins with custody. Who moves the oil? Who sells it? Who decides where it goes? That is the real lever. By taking physical control of exports, the system changes shape. Revenue can be promised elsewhere. Reconstruction can be discussed later. But flow is decided now. Most of the oil does not wander into the market. It is directed, allocated, absorbed. Refineries get what they need. Markets get only what they can tolerate. This turns volatility into a managed variable. Too little supply creates panic. Too much creates collapse. So the flow becomes a valve, open just enough to stabilize prices, closed just enough to maintain leverage. This is not charity, it is architecture, an energy system designed to dollarize control without declaring conquest. Once you see this, the earlier shock makes sense, and once it makes sense, you can see the next escalation coming. In the next part, that escalation arrives as a second crisis, faster, louder, and harder to contain. The second crisis does not come from scarcity, it comes from excess. Once control is established, volume becomes the weapon. Venezuela is not a marginal producer, it is a sleeping giant. Once capable of 3.5 million barrels a day, now throttled, compressed, waiting. Restarting that flow too quickly would flood the market, prices would collapse, producers would panic, allies would suffer. So restraint becomes as important as force. This is where volatility spikes, Iran trembles, Middle Eastern supply lines strain, markets brace for disruption. And behind the scenes, a single actor decides how much oil wakes up and how much stays asleep. That decision ripples outward. Every barrel released calms one crisis and creates another. Too slow, and instability spreads. Too fast, and the system snaps again. This is no longer crisis management. It is crisis choreography, a constant balancing act between shock and stability. And the margin for error is razor thin, because once markets sense that one hand controls the valve, everything changes. In the next part, we leave markets behind and look at the people who feel this system most directly. What happens when you pull power away from a system and let it rest in the hands of a few? The answer is always the same: the people. You cannot force a country to rebuild by putting oil in a pipeline. You cannot resurrect a nation by optimizing refineries. People rebuild nations. They restore their own economies. But this is not the full story, because there is a side effect. When Venezuela's oil starts flowing again, the effect is not just economic, it's demographic. Hundreds of thousands of people have fled Venezuela, leaving behind homes, families, dreams. Why? Because there is no work, no hope, no future. But what if that changes? What if the oil starts flowing again and businesses begin to grow? Jobs appear, the middle class revives, then the people return, not because of charity, not because of diplomacy, but because of opportunity. The US doesn't just want Venezuela's resources, it needs them to survive, not just in its refineries, but on its borders. A stable Venezuela means fewer migrants. A thriving economy means fewer people who need to cross the border in search of survival. This is not compassion, it's calculation, and it works. In the next part, we look beyond borders and see how this strategy shapes the rest of the world. The United States is not just managing its backyard, it is redefining it. With Venezuela stable, the ripple effect reaches beyond borders across the hemisphere. Energy is the currency of control, and when one country holds it, it doesn't just leverage power over its neighbors, it restructures the entire regional order. Venezuela's oil is not an isolated asset. It is the key to a new kind of economic hegemony. By taking control of Venezuelan exports, the US gains a new geopolitical position, not just in the Western Hemisphere but in the world. China, Russia, Iran, these are not just rivals, they are obstacles to this new order. By controlling Venezuela's production, the US reestablishes the Monroe Doctrine. No one else gets a piece of this. Russia, with its ties to Venezuela, finds itself out of the picture. Iran, with its regional ambitions, isolated. The US doesn't need to deploy military might. It doesn't need to issue ultimatums. It needs only to control the flow of energy. And in that, it holds the ultimate trump card. In the next part, we examine how this shift is not just political, it is deeply psychological, reshaping perceptions and alliances. The psychological shift is the hardest part to measure, yet it is the most profound. Venezuela, once a pariah in the eyes of the world, is now rebranded from a rogue state to a business partner. It's not just oil that the US is extracting, it is perception. The image of Venezuela has been recalibrated almost overnight. The same country that was once vilified is now seen as a necessary ally, a partner in economic recovery, in geopolitical alignment. This is not accidental, it is deliberate. The US has changed the narrative from one of confrontation to one of cooperation. It's a move that makes the reintegration of Western capital into the Venezuelan market possible. American corporations, once hesitant to return, now see opportunity. The bad actor has become the business partner. This is not diplomacy. It is marketing at the highest level. By changing the story, the US has opened the doors to massive investment in oil, in infrastructure, in technology, and the world buys it. In the next part, we'll look at how speed is now the defining characteristic of US policy, how velocity wins and bureaucracy loses. In a world governed by delay, speed is now the true measure of power. Every policy move, every executive order, every seizure of assets has been fast-tracked. The time between decision and execution is shrinking to the point of invisibility. Take the $500 million in Venezuelan oil, sold faster than anyone predicted. It wasn't just a transaction, it was a statement. The old system of checks, balances, and endless deliberations is obsolete. In its place is policy velocity, a new norm where action is the only thing that matters. In a world where uncertainty reigns, decisiveness is the only currency that holds value. The market doesn't wait for Congress, it doesn't wait for courts, it doesn't wait for public opinion. It adapts, it shifts, it moves, and those who move with it rather than against it shape the future. This is the new reality, one where policy is defined by what gets done, not what gets debated. In the next part, we'll pull back and look at the larger strategic design, how this is not just about Venezuela, but the foundation for total hemispheric energy dominance. All these pieces are not isolated. They converge into a single vision, total hemispheric energy dominance. The United States doesn't just want to control Venezuela. It wants to control the entire energy ecosystem of the Western Hemisphere. Venezuela's massive reserves are the cornerstone, but they are only the start. By integrating Venezuelan oil into the US refining system, the US locks down energy supply chains, ensuring that no one else can break in. And this isn't just about oil. The Gulf Coast refineries are optimized to process heavy crude from places like Venezuela, but also from Mexico, Canada, and beyond. Once Venezuelan oil flows back, it doesn't just fuel US industry. It locks down the entire region, keeping global competitors at bay. From there, the nuclear push, accelerated through small modular reactors, provides the stability needed to ensure that energy continues to flow, reliable and constant, even as the digital economy demands more and more power. This is a self-reinforcing system, where energy production and distribution are so tightly controlled that US dominance becomes a structural inevitability. And when the system is running, the US can stabilize the region economically, socially, and geopolitically. Energy is the force that drives this dominance. It is the lever that moves markets, governments, and societies. And the United States now holds the switch. In the next part, we'll look at the final layer of this strategy, how all of this culminates in a unified vision of economic, political, and geopolitical stability. This is where it all comes together. The United States, by controlling Venezuela's energy resources, has not just changed a market, but rewritten the rules of global influence. Every aspect of this strategy, from the refineries to the SMRs, from the asset seizures to the economic realignments, is building a new order. The Monroe Doctrine has evolved, and it's no longer about military force. It's about financial dominance, energy control, systemic leverage. By managing Venezuela's oil, the United States has essentially evicted rival powers, Russia, China, and Iran, disrupting their access to Venezuelan wealth and influence. But the true genius of this move is not just geopolitical, it's economic. Venezuela's revitalization is a tool for U.S. domestic benefit, driving down inflation, lowering construction costs, and securing energy for future needs, all while maintaining global stability. The system is self-reinforcing, a closed loop where Venezuela's recovery powers the U.S.'s growth and U.S. influence powers Venezuela's recovery. The domino effect moves through the Americas, stabilizing not just Venezuela but the entire region, all under the U.S. thumb. This is the future, a unified hemisphere where energy is the foundation of prosperity, where the United States does not just compete, it dominates. And as this strategy unfolds, the message is clear: who controls energy controls everything. This marks the end of this analysis, but the story is just beginning. Stay tuned for more, because what happens next will define the next era of global power.